thousands of dollars in meat and seafood stolen from a South Park restaurant. Kathy Monte has been named one of the top 10 restaurants in Charlotte. Our Glenn Counts with the exclusive story live from South Park this evening. Glenn, how'd the Thieves pull this one off?
Well, Dave, this is a very unusual case. Of course, it's not unusual to have break-ins here in the South Park area, but for somebody to go through all the trouble to, in effect, raid a restaurant freezer is definitely unusual. And when you hear what they took, definitely enough to make your mouth water. If you can't get to Paris, you can always come to the Cafe Monte. The restaurant has an excellent reputation for quality food.
We know we won't get the product back, but any crime like this should be punished.
Monte Smith is the owner. At the start of the weekend, he got an unpleasant surprise. Thieves broke in and stole $2,500 worth of some very expensive cuts of meat, like foie gras, rack of lamb, beef tenderloin, shrimp, and crab.
The next morning, our chefs arrived to an open door and an empty cooler.
You can see where the thieves cut the lock off the cooler and made entry. The burglary occurred at 3:45 Friday morning. Investigators say this caper required some planning or big freezer.
I would assume that if somebody goes to this effort to take this amount of property, that they would already have a market for it.
It was a big inconvenience. In fact, we ran off and had to restock ourselves immediately because we were going into a busy weekend.
The price of food seems to rise and rise no matter what. This may be true, but the fact is we have lots of different methods that we can use to control just how much it's going to cost to produce our foods, and it all comes down to making sure that you're working out exactly how much it costs and without wasting too much of it or having too much spoilage or too much shrinkage, theft. So let's take a look at this. Welcome, students. This is Chef Hawks, and we are continuing on our ProStart 2 adventure, and now we are going into chapter number 9, food costing. First off, let's look at the 9 stages that are included in controlling our food costs in the first place. So first we have purchasing. And so this can involve us making sure that we are purchasing from the right purveyor and making sure we're actually purchasing the correct amounts that we're going to need and of the quality we're looking for. We're going to be looking at receiving. We're going to make sure that when we receive that food that we're receiving the correct amounts, that it's the correct quality again, that it's not spoiled. And then we're going to store it. We're going to make sure that all of our storage is working adequately. Our refrigerators, our freezers, our dry storage are all there to protect our food. And then preparation. How much wastage do we have in preparation? Are our yield amounts where they should be? Or are we wasting some foods in our preparation with sloppy prep? Then we work on cooking and cooking production. So again, are we wasting any food? Are we burning any food? Are we having food where it's not being held, which is our next one along, is holding. Are we holding it at the right hot temperature or cold temperature to make sure that it's not sitting in the temperature danger zone? If we are cooking the food and it's supposed to be chilled, are we chilling it through that temperature danger zone as rapidly as possible to make sure that we have the best quality product at the end of the day? So cooling comes in as something that's critical. Then when we reheat, are we reheating only what we need, or are we overproducing and then having wastage in that sense as well? And then at the end of the day, service. Are we making sure that everything which is produced is getting to the table, that it's getting there in a timely fashion, that the correct order is being taken to make sure that we're not wasting food because the service team may be ordering incorrect foods? Every step of the way through these 9 stages, there are opportunities for controlling our costs or for allowing our costs to run rampant and get out of control. What do we mean by food cost? So this is the dollar value of the food that's used by your operation during a certain time period. It may be a week, it may be a month, maybe a year, depending on how large of a period you're looking at. But this includes all foods that were sold, given away, wasted, spoiled, incorrectly prepared, overportioned, overproduced, or with shrinkage or stolen. What's our inventory? Inventory is the food product that's in our storage currently. This is expressed in units, either dollar values, units of size, or units of weight, or both. And so this is generally done weekly or monthly, that you actually take inventory to make sure that you are accurately understanding exactly how much you currently have in your food storage. So your opening inventory is your physical inventory. That's the one that we're taking weekly or monthly. And this is the beginning of the given time period, that week or that month. The closing inventory is when, again, you take a physical inventory of the products, and that's the end of that given period. So the beginning of the month and the end of the month, or the beginning of the week and the end of the week. How do we determine that food cost? So we have a formula for this. So the opening inventory plus purchases gives you your total food. That's everything that you had, that you purchased in, or you currently held at the beginning of that month through to the end of that month. So that gives you your total food available. You then subtract your closing inventory, and that gives you your total food cost. So let's take a look over on the right here as a good example here. So we have $50,000 in our current opening inventory. That's how much food we have in our storage. Throughout the month, we purchased $45,000 worth of food on top of that. So that gave us, for that month, a total food available of $95,000 worth of product. We finished the end of the month with $35,000 that was remaining in our food inventory, that was in our storage. So that meant our total food cost for the month was $60,000. While we're determining our food cost percentage, we need to understand exactly what this is. So it's the relationship between sales and our food cost. So this is where we have to analyze our food cost percentage, but we have to be able to compare it by what our company standards are, what we expect, historical costs, what we've seen in the past, and industry standards too, to make sure that we're in line with where the rest of the industry is, so that we're perceived to have a good value. So the way we work out a food cost percentage is we take our total food cost and we divide that by our food sales. This gives us the food cost percentage.
Food cost is the dollar value of the food used by an operation during a certain period. That includes any food that has been sold, given away, wasted, spoiled, or stolen. To calculate food cost, start by comparing some inventory data. Inventory is the food product that is stored in the operation and can be shown in terms of units, dollar values, or both. Food cost is found by taking the opening inventory, adding all of the purchases made, and then subtracting the closing inventory. Opening refers to the start of a certain time period, and closing refers to the end of that time period, like the beginning of the month and the end of the month. So, food cost is the opening inventory plus total purchases, which equals the total food available minus the closing inventory. Let's work out an example using some real numbers. We can break the equation into two parts. First, our opening inventory is $50,000. Add that to a purchase, which is $45,000. The total sum is $95,000. That is the total food available, all of the food that would be in the operation if nothing was used. After finding the total food available, the $95,000, the second part of the equation is to subtract the closing inventory, which is $35,000. $95,000 minus $35,000 is $60,000, and that is the total food cost. For this example, it would be our monthly total, say for July. Now that we know the food cost, we can calculate the total food cost percentage. This is the relationship between the sales and the cost of food that went into those sales. The percentage is a piece of the total sales. Restaurants do not usually sell items for the same amount that they purchase them for. So, an example of food cost percentage is the invoice cost of raw meat in relation to how much the menu price is for the finished burger. Now, let's run the variables through a fun formula. This math can literally make or break your business. Food cost percentage is total food cost divided by total food sales. Using that formula, let's solve with some real numbers. For example, say it costs $3 to make a burger. Divide $3 by the amount the guest paid, $12. That equals 0.25, which, when we move the decimal point 2 spaces to the right, gives us 25%. By expressing the cost of food sold in percentages, it can be compared on a monthly or weekly basis, regardless of any changes in sales. Controlling this percentage becomes a key factor in your operation's profitability. It is important to monitor and note if the numbers are increasing or decreasing in proportion to one another, whether it is the total food cost or the percentage, to make sure the operation is on track and balanced.
Now we'll move on to standard portions and exactly what these are all about and how they can help us. So the standard portion cost gives you one serving or one portion, and so this is where we have prepared using the standardized recipe, and this is key. So we create accurate selling prices from having these standardized recipes with our specific portion sizes so that we know exactly how much it costs. And so when we sell it, the customers are getting exactly the same amount every single time. To do this, we very often will use recipe cost cards. And so these are what chefs generally will use. These days, very often, these are stored on computer as opposed to just being written. An example over on the right there, but this is a table of ingredients costs where we work out line by line individual ingredients that are going to go into a particular food. Each item is in the standardized recipe, and every multiple ingredient item is also in there as well. And this way, we can actually see exactly where everything works out. So here's a great example of a recipe cost card for mac and cheese. So as you can see over on the left hand side, we have the amount needed for each item. And so we actually have this separated out so it will work in an Excel spreadsheet by having the number of the amount of the units of measurement needed. So this way we can work out if I need 3 pounds of raw macaroni to make this particular dish. That 3 pounds of raw macaroni will cost me $2 per pound, and so it will cost me $6 total for the 3 pounds. The milk, I need 2 quarts, and the whole milk costs 10 cents per quart, and so 20 cents is the full cost. So I work my way across with every single every single recipe item that's in there. So at the bottom I can see that the full recipe is going to cost $11.27 to produce, and this will create 26 servings of macaroni and cheese. So I take $11.27 and divide it by the 26 servings, dividing it out between those individual servings, and then I get the realization of 43 cents per serving for that mac and cheese. When we take a look at recipe yields, so this is where we look at the number of portions that the recipe will produce. So with our mac and cheese, we got 26 portions that were actually yielded from that recipe. We identify the portion size by volume or weight. We calculate the total recipe yield. So this is done by taking the total yield, which is equal to the total weight or volume of the finished product divided by the portion size. When we convert recipe yields, this is where we're using a formula for increasing or decreasing the recipe yields, if we need more or if we need less, so that we can accurately still work out exactly how much we need to produce for what we're requiring. So this is where we identify the desired yield, and then we take the desired yield dividing it by the original yield to get our conversion factor. That's key. Multiply each ingredient by that conversion factor and convert the answers into measurable amounts, because when we very often use things like pounds and ounces, so there are 16 ounces in 1 pound. Well, if we worked it out to the ounce and we needed 160 ounces, then that doesn't really make sense for us to be able to work out for purchasing products. But if we work it out to the 10 pounds that it divides into, then that gives us our measurable amount. Then we make adjustments if needed to either equipment, time, or temperature involved in cooking it. A 50-pound pot of chili will take significantly longer to come up to the boil than it will if we only made 2 pounds of chili. Let's take a look at an example here of a recipe yield so that we can work out what it would take if we were taking our focaccia. And so with our focaccia bread, our recipe serves 12 individual rolls, but we only need to make 6 rolls. So what do? So we multiply each ingredient amount by the conversion factor. Where did we find that conversion factor? So we we needed 12 originally, and we divided by the 6 that we now need. So that gives us 0.5. So our conversion factor is 0.5, because for all intents and purposes, we are dividing our recipe into half to be able to get exactly what we need. So then we take the conversion factor of 0.5 for every single menu item. So to make our focaccia bread, we needed 780 grams of flour originally to make 12 rolls. To make 6, we multiply it by 0.5, so that gives us the new yield quantity of 390 grams of flour to make 6 bread rolls. We do the same with the water, same with the yeast, the salt, and the olive oil. Once we have all of this together, we can now produce this amount. The only adjustment we would need to make is if this were in different formats like pounds and ounces or cups, we would have to work out just to make sure that it's in sensible amounts that makes logical sense for us to be able to order these products. Also make sure, just in case if this is going to require more time for both preparation, temperature, or equipment that we might need, so rather than using a large mixer, we may use a small mixer in this case because we're making a smaller amount. But make sure that any recipes always make sense when you're converting them to either larger or smaller quantities. When we're controlling portion sizes, we can take those portions can be controlled by either weight, which is grams, pounds, and ounces, or by volume, which can be cups or milliliters, or by count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 apples, oranges, whatever it might be. Inconsistent portioning will equal to inconsistent products at the end, and very often, especially if it's pastry items which rely on accuracy, these will drastically not work out and actually yield in something which isn't possibly edible. We have all sorts of equipment to make sure that we accurately portion our foods out as well. So we have these portion scoops. Now sometimes these are known as ice cream scoops, but that's because they're used very often for ice cream. But that's not the only thing that you can use them for. All sorts of different soft products like mashed potatoes can be done in the same way. Serving dishes can be specifically sized for those ingredients. Ladles come in all sorts of different sizes, and so we can measure using full ladles. Ramekins, bowls, cups, and so on all have certain sizes, so if we're filling those a certain way up, then they can all match, then we have accurate portioning. Serving spoons give us exact portioning, and portion scales are the most exact of all.
Before you can decide how much to charge for an item on your menu, you must know how much it costs to make. This is called the standard portion cost. In order to determine the standard portion cost, start by creating a list of ingredients from the standardized recipe. For each ingredient, list both the amount needed and the unit of measurement you will use. We also need to know the portion size and yield of the recipe. In this case, the recipe is tomato sauce. The serving size is 1 cup, and the batch serves 6 portions. For each ingredient, list the cost, or the amount you paid, and the unit of measurement the seller used, which is found on the invoice. Convert the seller's unit of measurement to your recipe's unit of measurement. In this case, tomato paste comes in a 1-quart container. To convert to our unit, find for cups. The price on the invoice is the cost for the whole container or case of the item purchased. $15 is the cost for 1 quart or 4 cups of the tomato paste. To find the portion cost, divide the total amount by the serving size. Multiply the number of units needed for the recipe by the cost per unit. So, 1 cup of tomato paste costs you $3.75. Follow the same steps for all the other ingredients in the recipe. For example, 8 ounces of basil cost you $12, and 1.5 pounds of onion cost you 96 cents. Add together all the costs you paid for the ingredients in this recipe. So if tomato paste, basil, and onion are the only ingredients in this recipe, then the recipe cost will be $16.71. Divide the recipe cost by the number of portions the recipe yields. The tomato sauce yields 6 portions. The answer comes out to 2.785, but we can round up to 2.79, or $2.79. That means that the standard portion cost for 1 cup of tomato sauce is $2.79. Finding this cost is a key part of costing menu items and keeping the operation financially fit.
There are many ways that we can control costs, but pre-portioning items is a great way. So portioning items prior to service can help us during those rush periods to maintain a nice smooth service, but also by having fewer errors and being able to control those costs really very well. We want to produce quantities that are close to the amount that we actually need. We want to maintain the standard of food cost and sales, and also the quality too. Any leftovers, hopefully we'll be able to repurpose them, so we might be able to use them in things like soups. And then running out of food is always a problem, so that's why we want to make sure we have enough. Otherwise you're going to have disappointed guests, and for some guests, you only get one chance to impress them, and they'll look somewhere else next time. They may not return. Now we'll take a look at another tool that we have in our tool belt. Is called food production charts. So this is where products that are produced during a meal period are actually planned out, and we can actually chart all of this out, looking at different possibilities and ways that we can control. So a well-structured production sheet would ensure product quality, avoiding product shortages, minimizing waste, spoilage, theft, energy costs, and administrative costs. So this is a typical production sheet, and so this is something where a kitchen would have this up, possibly up on the wall at times, to go and show off exactly what types of things their objectives are. So you'd have the actual menu item would be listed, and so you'd list out all the major menu items, and there may be a recipe number that would be followed for that specific item. You have the portion size, the per person size, as they're going to purchase it, the raw quantity required to produce that, then the portion cost, and then any specific instructions and price would be on here as well. Notice we're also noting down the weather or any special conditions, anything unusual that happened, if there was a holiday that was happening, if there was an unusual occasion that occurred that day. We also have some space down in the comments down here that we can make a note as well, because sometimes those odd things that come up can have a dramatic effect, but next time we may be able to plan that as part of our production. So we can always look at forecasting portions of menu items that we use. We use sales history. That history won't necessarily tell us how much will exactly be used next time. However, it may be able to give us a pretty good idea as to what we may require. The percentage of total sales that each item provides, and then multiply that by the customer forecast that we were looking at estimating, and this gives us our estimated projections on what we require. Menu pricing is key to our success. So our menu we use as our primary sales tool to get information right in front of our guests so that they can make the choices, and hopefully we'll be able to persuade them in some of their choices too. Remembering when we looked in chapter 2, when we looked at our menu innovations, where we can actually figure out exactly how we can persuade customers to take a look at our menu and see the specific items that we want them to choose. We want them to eat our superstars, right? And so we reflect the overall cost of our operation would be reflected in this as well. So our menu price should include the purchasing costs for the food, the preparing costs for the food, the serving costs involved, and the labor, the rent, utilities, and all other costs that we experience. When we're looking at food costings, we need to be able to look at quality standards for all of our purchasing, receiving, and storing requirements. So we need to be able to choose credible suppliers. We want to have ethical and reliable suppliers approved on our supplier list. Very often corporations will have approved supplier lists just so that these ones are approved for certain specific products that we purchase, but also so that they are going within those ethical and reliable quality standards that we're looking for. We want to make sure that our food, above all, is safe, that we have the quality we're looking for, and that we're getting the right price offerings, that we have good agreements set up so that we're making sure we get the best deal we can for the quality we're looking for. We want to have clear specification sheets. These show exactly where we want specific products from specific suppliers, because certain suppliers will provide us with the best of certain things, but maybe not others. So we make sure that we're getting the best of everything that we can. When we're receiving, this is key to what we're looking for, is to have proper delivery timing. We don't want to have food being delivered right in the middle of the lunch or dinner service when those foods are very perishable, like seafood or fresh berries, things like that only have a very short time span before they go bad. We don't want to have something that's dropped off at the back door of the kitchen going bad. So we want to make sure that we're keeping tabs on things like that, and getting frequent deliveries too when it's appropriate, so that we can preserve that food quality. Let's take a look at some specification guidelines for receiving deliveries on certain different produce. So we have fish. When it's fresh, we want that in daily. When it's frozen, we'll take that weekly, but no more often than that, because we want to make sure it's not going to be at the back of our freezer getting freezer burned. When we come to produce, we want to have the bulk and hardy types of vegetables. They can be delivered weekly. But those delicate things, those strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, the ones that tend to mold, the very soft, delicate items, we want those delivered every day. Let's take a look at our dry goods. So shelf-stackable bulk ordering is preferable for this, and then you can probably purchase them at a better rate as well. When we look at meat, we're looking at 2 to 3 times a week to get our fresh meats in, and then dairy, about twice a week will work for us. Our receiving procedures should be that we identify the designated receiving area, and so normally you would have this being clean, well lit, easily accessible, with a good surface, like a nice large table to be able to receive the products in, and weighing scales so we can exactly measure them. We should have a copy of the purchase order so that we can see exactly what was issued by the buyer, and then this should specify the types and quantities and the prices of all the foods that you're ordering. And purchasing specifications should be available as well, so that you can check those requirements too. We should be looking at the item's quantity, making sure that you get the correct count or weight of items. Check against the purchase order and the invoice to make sure that they match. And then check the item's quality. Check the freshness, check the accuracy, take temperatures of things to make sure that they are safe. Verify the invoice's other details. Make sure that you compare the prices. Check the math. Put away promptly. Make sure you're storing dairy, meat, poultry, and seafood first. And then frozen food, produce, and dry goods should be stored securely in our storage areas. Then process any paperwork. Keep copies of all of this so you can refer to it.
Operations must receive deliveries in the most efficient, safe, and effective way possible. Having well-defined receiving procedures help to ensure that an operation's standards for quality and quantity are being met. Start by identifying a designated receiving area of the kitchen. It should be clean, well-lit, and easily accessible. Next, get a copy of the purchase order. This is the document from the buyer. It specifies the types, quantities, and agreed upon prices for products ordered. Then, have a copy of the purchasing specifications available. These can help the staff to check requirements. Once the paperwork is in order, focus on the items delivered by checking their quantity. If the items are purchased by count, count them. If items are purchased by weight, weigh them, especially meat and produce. Then, check the quantity against the purchase order and the invoice provided to you at the time of delivery. Make sure they match. After verifying quantity, check the item's quality. Open shipment boxes and check for freshness and accuracy for all items. After the items have been inspected, verify all of the other details on the invoice. Compare the prices on the invoice to those on the purchase order to make certain they match. Even check that the math on the invoice works out. If everything is in order, sign the invoice. If something needs to be returned, circle the item on the invoice and write the reason for the return. Have the driver write a credit memo for the item. After the items have been signed for, promptly put all of the goods away. Prompt storage protects against food spoilage and theft. Store dairy, meat, fresh poultry, and fresh seafood first. Then frozen food, produce, and dry goods. Secure the storage area when everything is in its place. At the end of the receiving process, work on the paperwork. Keep copies of the signed purchase order and the signed invoice for accounting purposes. Keeping clear expectations for receiving practices is critical to preserving quality product, as well as maintaining food cost and reducing waste.
Equally important is when we look at storage. So that we can make sure that we don't have wastage going on, we need to make sure we have procedures in place. So we have recommended storage temperatures for all of our foods. We have proper labels to make sure that we're rotating all of these foods, making sure that we're using our FIFO setting so it's first in, first out. When that milk comes in and it has the date of the 25th, and then 2 days later we have milk that comes in dated the 27th, that must go behind the date of the 25th, so make sure that first in milk is first out the door. Making sure that we've got inventory schedules, and making sure that we're cleaning regularly as well, and making sure that we have functioning and quality equipment that's efficiently working to store all of our product. Taking a look at our freezers, so this should keep food frozen solid. 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 18 Celsius is required. Having speed racks or shelving is okay to allow air movement. All the racking should be wire racking to allow that air movement. We should be cleaning this at least once a week and checking temperatures very regularly. In our kitchen, we check them at all 3 blocks when students are in, so 3 times a day we're checking them. Really, we should be checking them at least that many times just to make sure that there's nothing going awry. You have a lot of money involved in that storage. With our coolers, 41 Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius or lower. Avoid placing products on sheet pans. This blocks air movement. We want to make sure we've got full air movement all the way around all of our food. Monitor this daily for cleanliness and again, regularly checking our temperatures. Dry storage. The biggest danger to dry storage, dry and canned foods is moisture and heat. We want it to be dry. We want it to be on the cool side. So between 50 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit or 10 to 21 Celsius is perfect. Shelving should always be at least 6 inches off the ground to make sure that pests have no way of accessing them. We want to make sure that we have quality assurance measures in place with all of our food. So this is where we have prior to service, tasting each item to make sure they are correctly prepared. Verifying the quality during any holding, taking temperatures, making sure we're accurately maintaining them, make sure that they're covered if they need it, so they're not drying out. Check the appearance of all dishes to make sure that when that food goes out to the customers and the guests, that it's not going to be sent back because of dissatisfaction with anything. When we monitor our food quality, this involves all of our staff. It involves all the chefs from the executive chef all the way down. It involves the front of house staff as well. All of the service team, the service managers should be involved in this and should be looking to make sure that what ends up in front of the customer is always perfect. We should always make sure that we consider and value the opinions of all of these staff members as well. If someone is a whistleblower, literally of saying there's a problem with something, we should always listen to them and make sure that we follow up on all of these things. And so this is where we play into our corrective actions. We should be revising our product specifications, revising the procedures, revising the recipes, and selecting new vendors if we ever see issues that are coming up. Our physical inventory is where we count and record each item that's on our shelves. We monitor that inventory, so products should be ordered efficiently and in a timely manner as well, to make sure we don't run out of foods, but we're not overly holding onto stock that we don't necessarily need to. We shouldn't look to have any food product wasted. Again, where we mentioned before, the FIFO system, first in, first out. And so this helps us with our food costs by not wasting foods. So our quality standards for inventory include the opening inventory. This is where we calculate the total value of our inventory at a specific time period, maybe the beginning of the month. And then we multiply the unit cost by per item number as well to get our overall opening inventory value. The closing inventory is at the end of that period, maybe the end of the month, where we look at the total dollar value of the inventory in the end period there. If our inventory period is 1 month, during that month we may find that we get variances in prices. Certainly for meats and vegetables and things that, especially if things are seasonal, they're coming in and out of season, we may find that at the beginning of the month the peppers were a certain price, and by the end of the month they may have doubled in price if they're going out of season. So it's important that we are able to work out what the value of that inventory is. So there's 2 different ways that we generally work this. We have the latest purchase price method, and this is where we literally multiply the number of units by each item by the recent price. So the most recent price would have been the last purchase price. This makes it very quick to be able to work out. It's not necessarily the most accurate, but it's quickest. Or we can go by the second method, which is the actual purchase price method. This is where you multiply the number of units, but you have to look at each item by the price paid. So say if you purchased those peppers 3 times this month, you would have to look at the value of each time you purchase those items, and if you still have any of those items from each of those 3 purchase times. This gives you a much more accurate method of working out exactly the value. However, it can be extremely time consuming and sometimes almost impossible to figure out, especially if you have certain foods which are coming and going throughout that month where you purchase them.
Poor storage procedures and facilities can greatly increase food costs. If the products you buy are not stored under the proper conditions, things like spoilage can occur, which is like throwing quality ingredients into the trash and paying staff to do it. Quality standards for proper storage mean making sure all areas are clean, functioning properly, and efficient. The same standards apply for storage equipment, the freezers and coolers. They need to be clean, safe, and capable of keeping product at the correct temperature. Freezers must be kept at a temperature that will keep food frozen solid, 0 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 18 degrees Celsius. Walk-in freezers should have racks or shelving to provide enough space for items to freeze properly. Racks should allow for airflow, which is the air movement throughout the space. Airflow is critical for keeping consistent temperatures. Coolers and freezers have fans that circulate the cold air around in the room, keeping the unit the right amount of cold. Avoid placing product on sheet pans. They can block the airflow from the fan. Make sure to clean freezers at least once a week. Coolers must be able to store food at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius or lower. Coolers need daily monitoring for proper storage, labeling, and rotation. They should be cleaned every day. Monitoring the temperature of storage units is a way to know that the unit is running properly and efficiently. Check the temperatures in freezers and coolers regularly to make sure the products are held within the proper range. Dry storage areas require careful temperature monitoring as well. Moisture and heat are the biggest dangers to dry and canned foods in the dry storage area. Temperatures should be between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 and 21 degrees Celsius. All shelving must be at least 6 inches off of the floor. This makes access difficult for rodents and other pests and provides enough space to clean underneath the shelving. Dry storage areas should be cleaned on a daily basis. Remember, keep storage areas safe, sanitary, and efficient. Improperly stored food will be wasted, and wasted food increases food cost.
As you've seen, food costing is critical to everything in a company. You can have a highly successful company that has food costs going out of control that can fold and go under very, very quickly. And certainly as you work your way up in this profession, whether you're in the front of house or back of house, if you're ownership or managing, it's going to be critical that you understand and use all of these different methods to keep that costs under control. I hope you enjoyed this, and so I will look forward to seeing you in the kitchen soon. Cheers.